Even though the Falcons-Lions game was cut short by a scary injury, there's a lot to be excited about with this young Falcons defense.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And if you do not know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. the Jolly Green Giant, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And I've been covering this Atlanta Falcons team for almost 2 decades, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP. Still going strong on this illustrious podcast, and I thank each and every one of you that goes strong with me as everydayers. That means you make this podcast your first listen each and every day, and all you got to do to become an everydayer, subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcast. So today we are breaking down the Falcons-Lions preseason action. We'll be talking about some of the standouts on defense. We'll be looking at the rookies. We'll be trying to glean some information from who was inactive and what does that mean for some potential roster battles. We'll be talking about Lenny Krieg kicking the piss out of the ball, or in Germany, as we like to say, the mustard, right? But of course, we got to start with really what is the story of this game, which was that this Falcons-Lions game, for those of you that missed it, was ended early. The game was suspended after the first play of the fourth quarter due to a scary injury to Lions safety Morice Norris, who suffered a head or neck injury while trying to tackle Falcons running back Nathan Carter, and he was put on a backboard, taken in an ambulance to a local hospital. And we did get an update after the game from Lions head coach Dan Campbell that Norris is responsive, moving, and talking. But it was a scary moment, and essentially the Lions and Falcons, Campbell and Morris came together, Raheem Morris that is, came together and decided that they were going to end this game prematurely, given the gravity of what was a pretty scary moment on the football field, very reminiscent of some of the things that we saw a couple of years ago with Damar Hamlin. But again, fortunately, we've gotten some positive updates on Morice Norris, and hopefully, kudos goes to the various emergency services at work in Mercedes-Benz Stadium to be on the ball and be able to get him to the hospital where the medical professionals could really get to work and whatnot. But it's a scary reminder of the sort of gravity of this game. And what was notable to me is, like, earlier in the day, I was like sitting here crunching the numbers because it's been an ongoing debate here on Locked On Falcons about do you play your starters and managing the injury risk, and we've talked about that each of the last 2 summers, where the main reason why Raheem Morris does not like to play his starters in the preseason is because he's trying to mitigate that injury risk. And sort of I was like trying to put a number on it of like, what exactly are the chances that a guy could suffer a serious injury in one of these preseason games? And the number, the math I came up with, it's like a 2% chance. But even though the mathematics are not, necessarily a scary number, but because of the nature of this sport, that 1 to 2% chance, a probability, or whatever you want to call it, can be life-changing, life-altering, potentially devastating. And this game was kind of a stark reminder of that. So our thoughts and prayers go out to Morice Norris and his family, as well as the entire, Detroit Lions organization, as well as the Falcons players. But we'll focus on, the positives of this game. And we got to start the conversation talking about the young defensive players we've been spending the last couple of weeks talking up, what these young defensive guys building up to this game and sort of making their debut in this NFL action. So let's talk about the rookie class. And of course, we got to start off talking about, Jalen Walker, James Pierce, Xavier Watts, Billy Bowman, Jack Nelson. Nobody really sort of stood out in a huge way. There was no sort of eye-popping moments given some of the buzz and hype that was coming out of practice that you were hoping. And Jarvis Davis of Locked On Sports Atlanta and I talked about earlier this week in the lead up to this game of wanting to see some of those standout moments. But I think each guy kind of had a moment or two, and it'll be interesting to go back and rewatch the film probably tomorrow morning on Saturday to sort of focus on those guys to see if maybe they had a few more moments and maybe some standout moments that went under the radar. But, Jalen Walker, his moment kind of came in the first quarter where he was in on a tackle on I think a second down run to correct Reynolds. And I think James Pierce had a pressure in this game as well. I remember one time he got real close to the quarterback, Hendon Hooker, before he could or after he delivered a pass. And Billy Bowman had a standout special teams tackle, as well as, showcasing some aggressiveness with some of his run fits. There wasn't as much with Xavier Watts. The only moment I truly remember him was on a pass where he was able to force a runner out of bounds or whatever. But Jack Nelson had a shaky start to this game, but I think had kind of the road, if I'm not mistaken, had the road grading run block on that Nathan Carter run that led to the Norris injury, where Nelson had a couple of ups and downs on the first series or two, gave up a pressure, I think, on the first snap, and then had a holding penalty on one of either the first series or second series. But then I think really kind of settled down in this game. So it'll be interesting to go back and rewatch the film of this game to really focus in on the rookies and, get into the nitty gritty of some of the technical aspects of some of the things that they were doing and some of the things that we didn't quite catch live. And so we'll see what's what with those guys in the future. But obviously, in terms of having those sort of star-making moments, we didn't quite get that on Friday night against this Lions team. But we did have a couple of other standouts on the defense, looking at Arnold Ebiketie, looking at DeMarcco Hellams. And I want to talk more about those guys and what they were able to do in this game as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So have you ever wished that managing your money was a little bit easier? And it can be now with Monarch Money, whether you're looking to grow your savings or planning a big purchase. Monarch's going to put you in the driver's seat where it's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center where you can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you can start building wealth. Locked On has been very good to me these last few years, but I want to be able to take the money that they're paying me and manage it better, build better budgets, stick to those budgets. And Monarch Money is another tool in my arsenal to help me reach my financial goals, and it can help you reach yours and help you take control of your finances. All you got to do is head on over to monarchmoney.com, use the code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. And this episode is also presented by Yahoo Fantasy. With the NFL regular season nearly upon us, that means fantasy football is back in full swing. And this year, Yahoo Fantasy is turning things up with a fantasy football experience like never before. This year, I'm playing Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran, running your millionth league. I've been on Yahoo Fantasy for many, many years, almost 2 decades. And the updates that they're rolling out this month are, pun intended, fantastic. And to celebrate 28 years of fantasy football greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 new big features over 28 days throughout August. And to kick it all off, they just dropped their Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues, a killer new way to play fantasy football on Yahoo, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated each week until there's just one team left standing. With the season around the corner, now's the time to get your league together and give this new mode a try. If you're more into the classics, you can still play head-to-head private leagues or join a public league. So stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. So for me, the real kind of standouts in this game were Arnold Ebiketie and DeMarcco Hellams. They were out there making the sort of eye-popping plays. Arnold Ebiketie had a sack strip in this game, and you got to see this defense sort of flying around, making some plays. DeMarcco Hellams had a big-time hit on Craig Reynolds early in this game. He drew a penalty, but it was a bad flag. It's preseason for everybody, but the refs were in midseason form with some bad calls on that particular hit and whatnot. But, contrasting these two guys that are relative veterans, still, Ebiketie going into his fourth year, Hellams into his third year, but because he missed last year, it's really kind of his second season with the team. And these are the guys that, were able to hit the ground running with this Falcons defense, this new look Falcons defense. We talked about one of the things we're going to keep an eye on is what would the fronts look like? It seemed like predominantly the Falcons were in a 3-4 base front, and then sort of went to more of that 4-man over front when it came to obvious passing situations, which they were able to get abundance of on a lot of 3rd and longs in this game. And those young guys were able to pin their ears back and get pressure on Hendon Hooker throughout the game. And one of the reasons why I think the Falcons utilize a lot of 3-4, going back to a conversation we had this week, was the lack of linebackers, right? That if you were going to play base 4-3, you needed to put 3 linebackers on the field. And with the Falcons only have 4 healthy linebackers, I think that was a contributing factor to why they relied heavily on the base 3-4, because then you would only have 2 inside linebackers on that. And so you could split those 2 guys. And that's basically what we saw. It was D'Angelo Malone and Josh Woods getting pretty much all the snaps at linebacker in the first half. And then it was Nick Kubitz and I believe Caleb Johnson in the second half. But, getting back to Arnold Ebiketie, had that sack strip that really stymied a Lions drive. And AK has been a player that we've been talking up on this podcast all summer long as a guy to keep an eye on, that, as far as like the guy that's ready to go week 1, ready to perform again. For understandable reasons, Jalen Walker and James Pierce have gotten all the buzz. First-round picks, the future of the Falcons pass rush, AK going into a contract year. So this may be his last opportunity. And, there was a point this summer where Locked On Falcons insiders were sort of asking me like, oh, could they trade Arnold Ebiketie at the trade deadline? And I was like, yeah, sure. If James Pierce and Jalen Walker and Leonard Floyd and all those guys are, getting this thing going, and AK feels like an extra piece, that little nub on the chicken wing that you don't necessarily need, then maybe they would be able to shop him. But at least based off of tonight's performance, like, he's whether, you're a flats guy or a drumette or whatever you're into, he's the actual chicken wing based off of what we saw tonight. So we've been talking about AK all summer long as a guy that this scheme with this wide 9 front was going to really allow to enhance, and you got to see that on display with him, beating backups, as we talked about in the lead up to this game. Like, we want to see guys lose jobs tonight based off of getting embarrassed by this pass rush, and I think Arnold Ebiketie was able to provide that, in addition to that enforcing ability to DeMarcco Hellams. The other thing I'll say about DeMarcco Hellams, from what I recall, I have to go back and confirm with the film, but it seemed like he was the guy that was the personal protector out there with the quote-unquote starters on special teams, which is notable, as we've been talking about in the lead up to training camp. That personal protector job was going to be an open spot, with Avery Williams departing in free agency, that was going to potentially land a job. And we mentioned a number of times where DeMarcco Hellams was potentially one of the front runners to win that spot. And so far, it does look like that is going to be the case. So in addition to being an enforcer on defense, also providing that same enforcement on the special teams. But, the other thing that we wanted to talk about in this game leading up to it was like, who's going to be inactive, right? And, no two surprises when it came to some of the players that sat. We'll talk about a couple of guys that stood out to me. But, we'll see where the snap counts come at. But from at least going into this game, we talked about, okay, were there going to be some guys that got like a hook after that? They would go out there, play a series, and then get a hook. And then that would basically tell you, like we saw last year in the preseason opener, okay, these guys are all going to make the roster. I didn't notice that, at least in the first couple of series. It seemed like everybody that was out there for the first series or two stayed out there for 2 or 3 series through the first quarter. So it seemed like the Falcons were intent on playing those guys, the quote unquote starters in this preseason game, which for those of you haven't been listening to Locked On Falcons the last couple of days, none of the Falcons' actual starters on offense played in this game. The starters on offense and to a lesser extent on defense were all guys that are expected to be backups on this team, although there's a couple of guys on defense that are in the mix, like a Billy Bowman, like a Xavier Watts, for starting spots in the secondary. But because we didn't get a full fourth quarter, there was a couple of guys that did not play in this game that stood out to me as like, why did that guy not play? Braylon Trice being probably the most prominent of that. Was he going to get the action in the fourth quarter, or were the Falcons sitting him for whatever reason in its entirely? So I didn't get any update on, it sounded like he did dress for the game, but didn't get into the game before it was ultimately suspended. Another player that was inactive in this game that did not play was Tigun Quitoriano, who we have deemed the front runner to be the third tight end. And the fact that he did not play in this game kind of tells you that third tight end spot is pretty much locked up. And so that's one of those things that we were going to potentially glean from who didn't play and what would that mean for some of these back end roster spots. As far as I know, Quitoriano wasn't dealing with any injury this past week that would have held him out. Now, a couple of other guys that did not play, like Clark Phillips, the Falcons cornerback, Carlos Washington, who is potentially a front runner for that third running back spot. They did not play, but they were dealing with some injuries earlier this week. Phillips got injured in the Tuesday practice and then was not on hand for the Wednesday walkthrough or scrimmage. And then the same thing, I think, with Washington earlier in the week, where he was dealing with something. So their inactiveness may indicate that their roster spots are locked up, maybe, but at the same time, because the unknown of the injury may mean that it's not as sort of solidified or cemented as we thought. And the other sort of one that stood out to me was a player that we mentioned as a player I did not expect to play in tonight's game, but did play. And the fact that he got in the game late to me was very telling, was Morgan Fox, the D tackle, the free agent pickup that the Falcons had picked up this offseason. David Onyemata was inactive, and Leonard Floyd, like we thought, but Morgan Fox being one of those veteran players that I thought the Falcons would sit in this game. That was not the case. He did get some action. And so, we'll read mostly into that the Falcons are really happy with their young D tackles. The fact that they're, ahead of Morgan Fox as far as the depth chart is concerned, the Brandon Dorlises, the Ruka Rose as well. So that's a positive sign for those guys being up and comers, especially given that Morgan Fox is a very established pass rusher in this league. And we argued, going into training camp that he was your most proven interior pass rusher, at least based off of what he was able to do last year with the Chargers as more of that designated pass rusher that would get out there with Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa in obvious passing situations. So that to me was also sort of notable. But those were kind of the big takeaways I had from the Falcons defense, as well as sort of, the roster management. But, the biggest takeaway I had in this game was, the Falcons have a QB3 in Easton Stick. Whether you want to get stuck or you want to stick the landing, we'll talk about what this Falcons third string quarterback was able to do in this game that really had, a domino effect of positivity for the rest of this offense. And we'll break that down as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So it is time to fuel up and turn it up with 5 Hour Energy's Transfusion, bringing that bold grape, ginger, and lime flavor of your favorite golf drink, minus the alcohol, into a quick, energizing shot. Whether you're sinking birdies or just making memories of your friends, it's a hole-in-one for your energy game. We know Michael Penix is trying to up his golf game, so if he wants to stay sharp and energized, maybe he needs to try 5 Hour Energy Transfusion with the grape ginger lime flavor. That's going to give you the best parts of the clubhouse go-to without having to chase down the bev cart. And if you go to 5hourenergy.com today, that's the number 5hourenergy.com, you can use the promo code LOCKEDONGolf and receive 20% off your order. This order is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. This code is not good on subscription orders. Whether you're meeting up with friends or trying to turn 18 holes into 36, get the energizing boost you need to power through by ordering transfusion flavored 5 Hour Energy shots today. So, we are fans of inappropriate nicknames for Falcons quarterbacks here on this podcast, as we consider ourselves pumpers when it comes to Michael Penix. And we are also stickmen now on this Locked On Falcons podcast. Take that for whatever it's worth. But Easton Stick, the Falcons' third string quarterback, who got the start today with Michael Penix and, of course, Kirko. Cousins. Inactive in this game, as Raheem announced earlier in the week. This would be an opportunity for Easton Stick to shine. 4-time national champion at North Dakota State, and shine he did. Right, he really stuck the landing, as they say. Went 15 for 18 for 149 yards with a touchdown. Really impressive 6-play drive, 70 yards at the end of the first half in the 2-minute drill where he went 6 for 6. That drive was entirely Easton Stick, just looking like a veteran quarterback, distributing the ball, and then he just dropped a beautiful pass in the bucket to Chris Blair in the end zone to cap off that drive with a touchdown before ultimately giving way for Emory Jones in the second half. And so, we wanted to see good quarterback play here in this preseason. Of course, we're not going to get to see the incomparable Michael Penix all summer long in all likelihood. We're probably not going to get to see Kirk Cousins at any point all summer long. And again, we're believers here in Locked On Falcons that Kirk still has good football left in him. I know that is a very controversial opinion based off of how last season ended, but we did get to see it with Easton Stick. And so his ability to be able to distribute the ball, keep this offense on schedule. I think the Falcons were like 1 for 7 on third downs or whatever, often because they got behind in the chains, mostly because they couldn't run the football. But we'll circle back to the offensive line, not necessarily holding up their end of the bargain when it came to the running game. But it was basically a one-dimensional offense, and Easton Stick was able to keep this thing rolling so that they were able to move the ball at least quasi-effectively on a number of drives in that first half. And so that gave opportunities for some of these wide receivers to shine. We've been talking about how that 6 wide receiver spot is up for grabs. I know, there's been people out there trying to suggest to you guys that, the Jamal Agnews and the Kadero Hodges may be on the roster bubble. These guys got to get alive. They don't understand how much special teams matters. They ain't cutting us a Pro Bowl, especially in, I think Agnew's also got a Pro Bowl under his belt, although not recently, but they're not cutting 2 Pro Bowl special teams guys this summer. The fact that neither one of those guys played goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where it's like those guys' jobs are pretty much locked in. But that 6 wide receiver spot that probably is not going to get a lot of run during the season, but is a sort of a stash play for guys. It seems like Casey Washington has been building most of the buzz in the preseason or in the training camp. He did play in this game, but didn't really get any opportunities on those early drives. But Dylan Drummond got a ton of opportunities. Chris Blair got some opportunities. Drummond caught all 8 of his targets for 63 yards. Blair caught 3 of his 4 targets for 54 yards, including that 13-yard touchdown to cap off the first half. Nick Nash got into the game in the second half with Emory Jones at the quarterback and was a nice security blanket for Mr. Jones, catching all 3 of his targets for 35 yards. And, I've been labeled a Nick Nash hater by some folks, just because for me with the undrafted rookies, while I like some of what these guys are bringing to the table, like I'm not going to hype up undrafted rookies until you got to prove it as far as my book is concerned. And I thought Nick Nash on the 3 plays he had made some really good catches. So it's like, okay, all right, for all you guys that have been hyping up Nick Nash, it's like, the guy that's going to take the number 3 spot, and still pump the brakes on that. But in terms of showing that, yeah, this guy, after a relatively quiet camp where you haven't been hearing as much buzz about him as you have been about Casey Washington, about Chris Blair, about David Sills, and now Dylan Drummond tonight, he said, hey, I'm still here too. So, that competition for that 6 wide receiver spot, I think, is going to be one of the more compelling battles that we will be watching for the remainder of the preseason. And again, as long as Easton Stick is out here sticking it to defenses, these guys will have plenty of opportunities to shine. And so you like seeing that with this offense being, that's a big thing. You got to be able to evaluate these guys. If you're not getting effective quarterback play and receivers aren't getting open, which, if you're a longtime Falcon fan, you're out here, you can remember some of the past 20 preseasons that I've been privy to watching. Like, you have seen some really shoddy quarterback play. You've seen some really shoddy wide receiver play. So hopefully that is a thing of the past, and we'll continue to see more of this offense. Now, one area where the offense was lacking, as I mentioned earlier, was in the run game. The Falcons ran the ball 11 times for 22 yards, 2 yards per carry, and that includes a 9-yard run from Emory Jones. And so basically without that one run, they had 11 yards on 10 carries. So there was really no movement up front for this run game. And so that is a concern. We talked about this in a lead up to this game. Jarvis Davis and myself talking about some concerns about the second string offensive line and whether or not your depth is as good. Storm Norton was out of the lineup as we expected as your sort of proven swing tackle, and that gave Brandon Parker and Jack Nelson plenty of opportunities to show what they had. As I said earlier, Jack Nelson got off to a shaky start, but I thought got better. Parker did wind up giving up a sack at one point in the second half, I believe, to Emory Jones. And, you know, it'll be interesting to go back. I know Josh Gray got in the game, started playing some right guard, replacing Kyle Hinton in the second half. So it'll be interesting to go back and watch the film because, again, you know, that offensive line film or, you know, watching the offensive line, something that you often overlook, myself included, even a trenchman like myself, you know, when you're watching the game live. So you really have to go back and rewatch it to really get a good idea of what was going on in trenches to see, you know, where were some of those breakdowns. It seemed like linebackers were kind of just blowing through gaps and whatnot. And so was that not necessarily guys hitting their second level blocks or whatever? So that will be something worth going back and rewatching Saturday morning when I rewatch the game. But our last little tidbit before we get out of here, guys, in this rapid reaction is Lenny Krieg, you know, the German-born kicker. And we talked about it going into this game where, you know, is this kicking competition over with Younghoe Koo seemingly locked it up? As we said, going into training camp, I basically felt like I don't think this is a real competition. I think that, you know, Koo, you know, there's a chance that Lenny Krieg could, you know, unseat Koo, but I don't think those odds are particularly high. You know, as much as maybe some people thinking it was like, oh, there was like a 60% chance that, you know, Koo would keep his job and a 40% chance that Krieg would take it. I was like, I think I said like in March, it was like a 70-30. And then as we got to July, I was like, it's probably like an 85-15 at this point in time. But, you know, I feel like, you know, maybe not as confident when you see Lenny Krieg kick that 57-yarder. You know, he kicked it further than the Rhine. Yeah, in Germany. So as you guys know, if you've been every day of this podcast, you know, Falcons are playing in Germany. We haven't been able to break out the German accent here on the podcast as of late. And so, you know, Lenny Krieg's big kick in this game, that, you know, that kick probably could have been good from like 65 plus with how much mustard he put on it. Yeah, it's like a bratwurst. He did miss a 53-yarder. He hooked that one wide left, like the Elba. You know, I don't know what German rivers, you know, winding and whatnot, but I'll do my research, guys. I'll do my research on the different German rivers that I can compare Lenny Krieg's kicking to as we get through the rest of the preseason. So I think Lenny Krieg showed you why the Falcons are intrigued by him. As we've suggested before, this is more of a stash. This is more of an emergency option in case Koo falls off a cliff or gets re-injured. And because he's an international player, you know, the Falcons can really stash him, unlike another kicker where if they had a quote-unquote regular kicker, some team could come along and take him off the practice squad. That's not the case with an international player like Lenny Krieg. So, you know, Lenny Krieg did his thing. Certainly intriguing. So it'll be interesting to see him continue to kick and to see if, you know, by the end of the preseason, we're sitting here going like, hey, you know, maybe this is a real competition. So that will be something to keep an eye on. But obviously our thoughts and prayers still go out for Morice Norris. Hopefully he's safe, as we've discussed over and over again about playing guys in the preseason, you know, after circumstances like this. You know, Raheem has won the debate at this point in time. And so it'll be interesting to see how he approaches these upcoming preseason games. Obviously he can't forfeit these games. Players are going to have to play, but it'll be interesting to see who gets those opportunities and whether or not that makes him even more conservative than he already was with playing some of these guys. And you can understand after tonight's events why he would be that way. So that's a natural inclination. So we will refrain from criticizing Raheem or questioning his motives or anything like that when it comes to keeping guys sidelined in the preseason based off of what we saw from Mo Norris tonight. But again, our hearts go out to Mo Norris. Thoughts and prayers to him and his family. Hopefully he is recovering and we continue to get positive news and positive updates on that front as the night and the days go on. So guys, we will be back I don't know if I'll do after what I'll rewatch the game Saturday morning, and we'll see basically do I feel like there's like 20 minutes of more content I can give you guys tomorrow. That's a possibility here on Locked On Falcons. If not, then we'll just be back Sunday evening with some of my thoughts, as well as any sort of developing news over the weekend, watching some other preseason games. So make sure you continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. For those of you that missed it, we had a full hour of a Falcons squad show on Locked On Falcons and Locked On Sports Atlanta immediately following the game. That's going to be the trend all season long. We're still working out the kinks. My goal is to usually do my own sort of personal rapid reaction solo, where we can get a little deeper into some of these topics that we discuss on that hour-long show that stand out to me on the Locked On Falcons, usually within 20 minutes of that show ending. So usually, hour and a half of great content coming at you after each game, but the timing will be interesting. But again, this preseason for everybody, we're working out the kinks, and we'll get that thing revved up and ready to go by the time we get to the regular season. So make sure you continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. Check out Locked On Sports Atlanta to get all that action as well on the hour-long Falcon squad post game. And of course, for your second listen, if you're looking ahead to some football futures this fall, as well as, trying to make some money with some MLB locks, Lee Sterling, Kevin Rogers have you covered on the Locked On Bets podcast. It is all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.